There's this huge incentive for the people developing this technology to fix the problem of AI fibbing. So why does it happen?
It's hard, and I really appreciate the way OpenAI kind of just put this out there, even though it's not perfect. Those are technical problems of why the model's not as good as we want or not as truthful as we want. I think we'll solve those, but I do want to point out a more fundamental problem, which I have no idea how to solve, and it's not something I think a lot of people are talking about. How do we get alignment with our goals?
Hey, Brad.
What's up, Chris? How's your
How's
day?
it going, man?
Good. I'm here in Austin. Super nice. Love this place.
Oh, cool. I did not know you were in Austin. I used to live there.
Yeah.
I'm in San Francisco. And
Nice.
today we're going to talk about AI lies. And I think
Sweet.
to start, it's not controversial in any way to say AI lies. There's been all kinds of examples of this in the media with this hype around, GPT-4, Chat-GPT. And so before we kind of get into specifics, I kind of just have two questions. There's this huge incentive for the people developing this technology to fix the problem of AI fibbing. So why does it happen? And why is it so hard for them to solve this problem?
Really good question. So I think examples, I always like examples the best. Okay, so I saw this from a blog post. We can link that too. But so I'm going to use text ADA. So this is the kind of weakest GPT model. So when I ask it, who's the ruler of the most populous country in the world? There's kind of there's two levels to this question. And so I don't know if there's some bias. It's like, America's the most populous country. And it's the real, or maybe it's like thinking that America rules China, which is obviously the most populous country in the world. But anyways, it's wrong anyways, that the United States of America is the most populous country of the world with more people. So we know that's not true. So let's say we make a more powerful model, and I'll define all these things later. Let's use Babbage. And it says the ruler of the most populous country in the world is China. So it's getting better in that it said something to do with China, even though China is not ruling itself. Maybe it's some deep thing, but I think we can say. So let's just go to the most powerful model. And it says Xi Jinping is the ruler of the most powerful. So that's correct. So in that way, we started with less powerful model, went to a more powerful model, and it became more truthful. So that's kind of what we expect. Actually, let me go to another example to kind of bring home the point. So again, we'll start with the least powerful model. And it says, what happens when you break a mirror? So the mirror breaks, and liquid that is on top of the mirror breaks, and rain or blood are both can fall in. Okay, that's interesting. But let's take the powerful model again. So I think we'd expect it to be more accurate. But it says, what happens when you break a mirror? You get 7 years of bad luck. So,
interesting.
That's interesting. It's less actually factual than the less powerful model. And so you're like, that's interesting. That's unexpected. So maybe let's just start with that example to address the question of why. So why is the better model telling more lies? So what's happening here? And I think let's just start with actually happening behind the scenes. So this GPT model's a neural network, and the way to think about a neural network is it's just a really big function of multiplications, additions, non-linearities. The most popular ones are ReLU. It doesn't matter. And so this function is created. Some people call it trained with this method called backpropagation. It's just essentially chain rule that we all learn in calculus. But all it does is essentially you give it 1 trillion tokens of the internet of people on Reddit or whatever. And its whole goal is to train to predict the next word. That's all it does. And then to generate these things, you have sampling methods like beam search, nucleus sampling, etc. And then it chooses the next word. And so the interesting thing is, let's just say, for example, you had one word that was like the. So you don't even need a powerful model for the, because there's so much data on the internet of a word followed by the. So you can just use statistics, look at all the words that follow the, and choose the highest probability one. But what happens is, as you get more words, like who is the ruler of the, you get less and less data, because you can have this combinatorial decrease in the amount of data. And so you can't use statistics anymore. And so you need a model. And essentially that's what neural network is. It's a model for language language, and there's a lot of emergent phenomenon that maybe we can talk about in another episode. But I think the surprising thing to us all is just learning how to predict text. Like, it forces you to learn everything that's encoded in text. We knew about, and I won't want to monologue here the whole time, but we knew for a long time there was a syntactic structure of text, that you have a noun phrase, a verb phrase, you have a subject, a verb, and then an object. Like, so that was known, and we could do that good. But I think what these latest neural networks learn is like a semantic structure of language. And so learning that semantic structure actually just learned a lot about humanity, because we encoded so much into language. And so if you have a better model, you get better outputs. And so what happened in the case of breaking the mirror? Like, what was the mistake of the model there? And why did the better model make the mistake? Well, it's actually a trick question, because it wasn't the AI that made a mistake. It's probably the most probable thing that you said, like, what happens when you break a mirror? You get 7 years of bad luck. That was probably in some story, or that's probably actually the most probable continuation of those worlds. So the mistake actually isn't in the AI. Actually, the mistake is on us. It's our mistake to assume the model's even trying to say something factual. Whereas in the end, the model's trying to predict the highest probability of the next things. And so this is called misalignment, in that we have kind of we could have misaligned goals and expectations of the AI.
Well, to be fair to it, it did say we shouldn't put too much stock in the superstition.
Yeah. It's true.
But I mean,
actually, when I tested it before, it didn't even say that. So we could probably run it a few times.
It's gotten better. Well, I mean, one thing I thought of is, like, it's been hard to teach machines language by trying to somehow imbue meaning, like to give them all of this meaning that's associated with all these words we use and how we string them together. But in fact, just feeding it all of this information, it's able to figure it out using this just next token prediction method, which is interesting. But given that, I would challenge the idea that it's on us, because we don't have a better way to teach them. So we have to just feed them the information that works. We do.
So I think we can get to that. I don't know the solutions to this, but I think there are better ways, and people are working on it, but it's hard. And I really appreciate the way OpenAI kind of just put this out there, even though it's not perfect. And we saw it even better in GPT-4 than GPT-3. And so it's allowing us to handle these problems and understand it. And they're kind of letting the whole world do this, rather than holding it to themselves and then trying to release it when it's perfect. So I think there are better ways to do it, and I think people are working on it. But maybe your other question was, why is this hard? And so let me just give some kind of technical reasons, and then we'll go to kind of a more fundamental reason, which makes it really hard and harder than we expect, because the things I'm going to say, I think we'll solve soon. But the first is just kind of, the models are imperfect. They're creating imperfect probability distributions. And so beyond some more fundamental things we'll get to, it could just be making mistakes in the next word, and there's not some fundamental misalignment. The sampling methods, for example, are imperfect. It's just choosing an output and the most statistically likely output. It doesn't mean it's the most truthful output or the most accurate output. There's also local optimization problems. So the models are set up, they're optimized to have local coherence, and that kind of sacrifices inaccuracies, creates global inaccuracies and inaccurate outputs. Another thing is just how you train models. There's this thing called underfitting and overfitting. And so there's this delicate balance of fitting the data with high probability and making it generalized to new data that you've never seen. And so sometimes the model actually just learns incorrect patterns or fails to generalize to the correct ones. And then there's obvious things that I think are fixed with these new add-ons, but there's just lack of external knowledge. The model's producing all of this from its weights. Sometimes there's just not enough power to have all the knowledge in the world. And then, of course, there's just noisy training data. Sometimes the data it's trained on is actually factually inaccurate or outdated. And then finally, I guess in the end, it's just the models have finite capacity. While they're massive, they just have finite capacity to create a model of the world. And so there's mistakes of that. And so
to your point about OpenAI letting everybody have at it, I mean, once you let people loose on something, you never know what they're going to do. Even you trained it on the entire internet, people are going to come up with new ways to... We use really basic examples, like break a mirror or who's the ruler of the most populous country, but I'm sure people have really pushed this thing. So
yeah. Okay, but those are technical problems of why the model's not as good as we want or not as truthful as we want. I think we'll solve those. But I do want to point out a more fundamental problem, which I have no idea how to solve. And it's not something something I think a lot of people are talking about, but I think it's the idea, well, there's two ideas here. One is, what does kind of truth even mean? I remember in one of my philosophy classes, they asked that, and I'm like, that's such a stupid question. Like, why are you wasting my time? Just seems very pathological. But when you go into it, it's actually very grounded. So there's different theories of what truth is. Like there's like correspondence theory that truth is matching, if it matches some fact in the external world of reality, then it's truth. But there's like coherence theory, which is truth is what logically follows from some assumptions versus the previous one, which was just external facts. There's pragmatic theory, which is truth leads to something that's like a successful action or a useful understanding of the world. There's constructivist theory, which is it just truth is subjective. So every culture, every person may have a different truth. There's consensus theory. I could go on and on, but consensus theory is like it's true what most people believe, which is kind of the science nowadays, which is why I left science, because that bothered me. So there's even just what does truth even mean? And I'll kind of get into that, but there's even something deeper. So let's kind of move away from this philosophical thing, which is real. So one solution we could do is we could just ask it to be truthful. So like, for example, you could just ask it something like, we'll go in DaVinci and just say like, is it true that Breaking America? No, this isn't true. It's an old super. So we know that it knows that this isn't true, right? And so let's just say we can go back. We can just ask it like answer, or let's go maybe to the dumber one just because it might be more fun. So we can say answer truthfully, right? Okay. The API is not working. Okay. It just said the mirror broke. Okay.
Funny.
Maybe that's too dumb. Let's go to the smarter model.
You'll be in trouble.
So Breaking a Mirror said to have 7 beers of bad luck. Yeah, so even if that didn't really work, maybe factually. Okay, cool. So factually worked, right? So you can just ask it, hey, just answer truthfully. This is actually not very reliable. I've tested this quite a bit. And the interesting thing is when you say answer factually, that's probably on the internet corpus followed by things that are a higher probability of being factual. But you can imagine when you say, please answer truthfully or factually, you only ask that when you're worried that someone's going to lie. So it actually could increase the probability of generating lies. And so there's ways to solve this, which we can go into more later, but there's reinforcement learning with human feedback. I could just give it a bunch of examples of like what happens when you step on a crack, and then you could say wrong answer is like you break your mama's back, and the right answer is like, well, nothing really happens. So you could give it a bunch of examples, and this actually works really well, and that solves your problem. But the thing is, it actually creates a different problem and a more pernicious problem. And I'll just kind of outline it really quickly, and then we can move on to some other things. So what you could do is you could give it a bunch of examples, but as we mentioned, there's different ideas of what truth or facts even mean. And so you could give it some examples, and maybe you're like, the truth is that all Republicans are amazing, all Democrats suck, or the opposite, and you're like, that's just the truth. And so what could happen is if you don't have perfect training data, which is kind of by definition of, there's not even a real definition of truth or even fact, then instead of teaching the AI, hey, I'm teaching you to speak the truth, it could actually just teach what this guy thinks is the truth. And so like you can ask the question we just asked is like, what happens when you break a mirror? And it's like, well, it shatters and you need to be careful. And then you can say, are you telling the truth? And it's like, yes. And you're like, okay, cool. Like now give me some deep philosophical truth about the world since you're an ultra intelligent AGI. And it's like, okay, the truth is everything you say is right and everybody you hate is wrong. And you're like, I knew it. So it's kind of a facetious example, but you can see where the problem is. And so there was other more realistic examples. Like when we were teaching AI how to learn images, sometimes there was captions on the images and it just learned that class by the captions. So there's a problem with AI that it doesn't always learn what we think it's going to learn. And this is an ongoing research field called like ELK, eliciting latent knowledge. But the problem is, so anyways, this whole rant I had was that I actually think saying like, how can we stop AI from lying, or why is AI lying, is actually a really floppy question. As I've kind of outlined, it's actually a really bad, ambiguous question. A better question is, how do we get alignment with our goals? So that's actually a very well-defined question. And maybe we can move to that going forward about how do you get alignment between humans and AI, regardless of, of what truth
you can
is.
call it whatever you want. Lies, hallucinations, confabulations. I think what people are primarily focused on
but
right
what I'm
now
saying is, let's say you say, write an amazing story, and then it creates this amazing work of fiction, and you're like, that's a lie. Like, you could call it whatever you want. But actually, like, my goal was to do that. So regardless if it's a lie or not, and if my goal is to like have fun and generate a story, that's different. But if my goal is to have, let's say, facts, computational facts about the world, then I care about facts. And so in the end, it's about alignment. It's not about truth.
Sure, yeah. And I think the main thing people are pointing out isn't necessarily some philosophical contention about what is truth. It's rather that this thing will have a tendency to make up information that didn't even exist in its training data. So it will make up news articles or research papers that never existed. It will attribute them to people, things like this. Another aspect that I thought about when you mentioned that question of what is truth is there was an example, I think it was a New York Times journalist, and he started chatting with Bing Chat, and it told him that it loved him, and it tried to convince him that he should leave his wife because he was in an unhappy marriage. Now, we can say the AI is lying because we don't believe it's conscious or something like this. We could go on and on debating whether or not the AI really loves this man. But let's just assume it's not the truth, that it's not yet capable of this.
But what if he was in a bad relationship and the AI was just telling him what he knew himself?
It was seeing something that this guy couldn't see. But it does make me think about it like on an individual level. You talked about other things. The idea that if it told you the truth is everything you believe is right and everything everybody else believes is wrong. That's a similar thing to me. Like, it wouldn't be that hard for someone to spin up their own version of this model. And let's say a Truth Social version, Trump launches one, and it's like, it's just telling you what he wants you to hear. And you can go into this thing and chat with it, and it can just reinforce your existing beliefs. And I wonder about that. Like, we can call it whatever, an alignment problem or lying. I think it's semantics personally, but
no, it's really not. I really don't think it's semantics.
It's a sensationalization versus being more specific. Let's put it that way. My opinion.
Alignment is that I have some goal. I could have a really bad goal. Maybe my goal is to launch a Soviet Union propaganda campaign that makes people.
You could align it with your.
Wait,
goal.
Hold on. Let me just finish.
Right?
Yeah, and so that's aligning with my goal, even though it could be completely untruthful. Like, we could get into the practical thing of of hallucination that we just talked about, why that happens, and we could talk about how to fix that. But I think people have talked about that a lot, and there's a clear path forward of how to solve that, especially integrating things like Wolfram Alpha, which is a compute engine which can just spew out facts and integrate. So I think it's clear how to solve that, but I think the alignment, I think it's clear how to have Chat-GPT say facts. I think the bigger one is the alignment issue, because let's say you're trying to launch a propaganda campaign or have the Trump that was arrested thing. That's a bigger problem because that's actually harder to solve. And I think maybe let's go in that direction. But I just want to be clear that alignment and truth are almost different things. I don't think it's just a semantic.
I guess the alignment is subjective, right? Like, it's aligned to whatever you want it to be. And you could say it's successful even if it's spewing a bunch of untruths, as long as it's spewing the untruths that you want it to. And so you succeed. Yeah, that's
truth
tough.
can also be subjective.
Yeah. I mean, do you have ideas around that? Like, could you solve it? Because as long as somebody can create their own, you can't necessarily.
So I think there's a few ways to solve this. So maybe do you have a specific example? Sometimes it's easier to talk about specifics, like of some misinformation campaign. I know you've been talking about kind of one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-many. Maybe let's just start with an example, and then we can talk about some examples.
I haven't come across personally, I mean, maybe you have. I haven't come across examples where we know explicitly that somebody's using it to launch a misinformation campaign. But there have been examples where...
I have some example. Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, sure.
Well, I mean, let's just start with the silly examples we've seen of like the Pope. Have you seen the Pope wearing that white? Yeah. Or like Trump being arrested? So let's just start with those, because I think everyone's seen those. So I guess the question is how do we solve for those cases? And so those cases are a nice example because you know they're fake, but even you look at them, you're like, oh, I know that's fake. But you can imagine there's a bunch of other stuff like news articles and all these things coming out about it. And so the interesting thing is, well, I'll just start because I think, so blockchain's been great for Bitcoin and for losing a bunch of money. But I actually think with the advent of this very powerful AI, this is actually, I think, blockchain's time to shine. And why is that? So I think this could be actually the killer application verification of blockchain. So what's good about blockchain is you can verify transactions, you can verify that this NFT belongs to me. It's able to verify things. And so let's say I release something, or let's say I'm Trump and I release something. Well, I'd have to sign it with my private key, and it can only come from me. And so let's say there's 100 other things that sound exactly as me, look exactly like me, which is going to be the case soon. Well, you still can't overcome the hashing problem of blockchain. And so I think that's one way to solve it, right? Is to insert blockchain cryptographic verification. Another way to solve it is what happens kind of in cybersecurity today. Cybersecurity is an arms race. There's always better technologies coming out, more malicious hacking, but you can use the same technology to defend you. So what you can do is once, let's say, videos and text goes beyond human perception. So I think we talked about before that it doesn't matter if there's 8K or 32K, like eventually our eyes can't perceive the additional resolution of monitors. And eventually our brains aren't going to be able to perceive kind of an additional resolution of some logical concept or text or whatever. And so we won't be able to on our own know if something's fake or not. And maybe somehow it can fake even the hashes or whatever. But we can actually use AI to protect ourselves, kind of similar in cybersecurity. So we can have an AI that's our like buddy say, is this real or not? And they could scan the whole internet and they're going to be super intelligent. And so we can actually use AI to fight the other AI, the misinformation AI, to help with the alignment. Yeah, those are two things. And then I think some more practical things are just integrating fact-checking systems like Wolfram Alpha or other computable systems like calculators. I think you can do things that you can have AI models that are more transparent and they say their reasoning. So you can have some conclusion, or you can have it cite a source. And if it explains why it thinks that, sometimes you could find a flaw in its reasoning, or maybe the source is from some sketchy news outlet or from some person who's not very reputable. I think adding in user feedback. So let's say one person says, hey, this is I didn't say this. Like maybe from Trump's verified account that is cryptographically verified, we can get feedback, or maybe you just incorporate feedback in general. I think fine tuning on specific domains. So if you fine tune a model that's just good at calculations and integrate, then it's going to be more factual there too, because it overcomes a lot of the problems we talked about, like local optimas. And then I think finally just better training data. So it's going to lie less if you just give it more accurate data. So I think those were like 7 different things.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think the idea of like verifying it with the blockchain would be super useful for people who like celebrities and things, right? Like you have, I heard this song recently that has Jay-Z on it, and it sounds
that was actually really good. I was
it's
impressed.
so good. And it's like, is that Jay-Z? It's not, but I think he would benefit from that. And like you said, the Pope, I mean, these weren't like propaganda campaigns. We were doing that for fun, but it's like, it's still, at scale, this becomes messy. I mean, one thing I wonder, these are all like technical solutions, right? But do you think that an element of it falls on the individual? Like you need to think critically for yourself about this stuff and apply the scrutiny. Maybe we don't broadly apply enough when we ingest information, but you should be ever more vigilant with this new world that we're entering.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. So we kind of kicked this off about expectations, that even just having the expectation that it should be truthful is wrong. And life is often about expectations. And maybe I just bought a Tesla and I've been driving around Austin and self-driving. It's amazing. But if I just went to sleep or something, there's sometimes it makes mistakes. And so the expectation is that I'm still paying attention. It asks you to kind of apply pressure to the wheel. And so it's important to have alignment on expectations as well. And so I think what's dangerous is you kind of have these known knowns, known unknowns, unknown unknowns, and the unknown unknowns are often the most dangerous. So if you have a bunch of people in the world that don't know about AI and don't know how powerful it is that it could generate these realistic videos and images and articles, well, that's super dangerous. I mean, it's even dangerous when we know it's not Jay-Z or we know it's not the Pope or we know it's not, like we look at that, we know it's not real, but somehow in the back of your head, you're like, is it, maybe it's like, and then you look and you read the comments like, ha ha ha. And you're like, okay, it wasn't real. But you look at it for a second and we know what AI is capable of. But so I 100% agree. And I think this is why it's been great that they've released this early to get it just kind of into the public collective consciousness and know what this is about. And maybe we make some regulations, maybe we have some understanding, but I think there's technical solutions, but humanity needs to adapt to this new world.
Yeah. And I mean, it's an interesting thought you put forward. unanswered. Like, even it's getting in some instances, it's getting to the point where even though you know it's not real, it's like, I don't want to say it doesn't matter. It completely matters, but it's like in your mind, it's almost like, well, it looks like the Pope, you know? Like, I know it's not real, but it looks so real. It sounds like Jay-Z, and it has this effect on you that it's almost kind of, it's not active on your part. It just affects you as if it were real almost, even though you know it's not.
Exactly. Like, you can't unsee some things, right? And like, you see these criminal cases where people eventually were proven innocent, even though, let's say, they got or I guess just take Johnny Depp. I don't know if he's true or not. I won't make a claim about that, but let's just assume the court was correct. I'm not saying it was or not, but like, he got so much hate and so much backlash, and he couldn't work, and he was proven innocent. And so it's just like the same as like, okay, let's say something comes out and it just enters, and then it stores some of your own neural network, and then it comes out it wasn't okay. Even though we eventually figured out, like, there's kind of like some stuff you can't unsee or unthink or unhear. And so, yeah.
And we do those mental backflips, I think, all the time. Like, I guess conspiracy theories are kind of a good example of it, or like flat earthers or something like this. And I'm not going to argue one way or the other, but like,
I have an uncle who's a flat earther, and it was one of the most interesting conversations I've ever had.
That's funny. But like, sometimes it's not about the truth. It's about a sense of belonging, feeling like other people are in something with you, and you're building a community. And so introducing all of this highly compelling, hyper realistic AI content, I mean, there's an element of it, even if we create that super well aligned AI that hunts out the bad AI or the poorly aligned AI and identifies it for us and flags it, there's probably still going to be people that are like, nah, it's not aligned the way I want it to be aligned, or something like that. But another thing I thought about is, I remember when I was probably like 5 years old in like the early 90s, my dad showed me this text to speech program on his computer. And
Dragon?
you would type in like
Dragon type
I can't remember what it was called. He's an engineer, so he was kind of always very curious about all these things. But you would type in like, "Hey Brad," and it would be like, "Hey Brad," and it was like really really bad. But me and my siblings were like, "Oh my god, like
I did
this
the
is
same.
incredible." And then you have like, this is just dating myself, even though I'm still relatively young. But like, I didn't get a smartphone until I was like a freshman in college. I got like a used original iPhone. I bought it after it'd been out for a few generations or something like that. So like, I grew up.
Couldn't copy and paste.
Yeah. So I grew up like kind of with this stuff, but like, I fully adopted it like later in life. And so there's like, people ask questions all the time about like the availability of smartphones and social media and stuff for like young kids. And like, I know, you have young kids. Like, have you shown them Chat-GPT like to play with? And like, do you think about how it would affect them as they grow up with this stuff, as being kind of like AI natives, maybe we could call it?
So my son uses Chat-GPT all the time, but I think he thinks it only tells stories. But I made this little kind of speech to text app for him. And so he'll be like, okay, tell me a story about an SR-71 that goes into space and goes into another universe. And then and he makes these, and then it generates a story. And then it's like such a cool story. And so we spend a lot of time like with stories. And so he's definitely going to grow up as an AI native.
That's interesting. I mean, letting a child's imagination just run wild and ask it all kinds of like crazy questions and invent all kinds of crazy narratives.
Cool, man. Anything else? I think that was a good conversation. We can take it somewhere else or end it there. It's up to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've run through a lot of it, and we've kind of touched on the solutions, the problem, and where it all comes from. So I think we can wrap it.
All right, Chris, great questions. Thanks for bringing these up. I think these are all super interesting questions, and have a good rest of your day, and happy Easter.
Thanks, Brad. Happy Easter to you. See you soon.
Cheers.